When one thinks about the American Revolution, they cannot help but think of George Washington. In today's episode, we are going to be cooking up one of what was considered George Washington's favorite dishes, Johnny cakes. Now, we're also going to talk a little bit about the differences between the Johnny cakes that would have commonly been served at Mount Vernon, as opposed to the Johnny cakes that Washington and his soldiers would have had access to while on campaign. But nonetheless, folks, we hope that you will stay tuned and follow along with us for the last episode in our America 250th mini-series, The Foods That Made America. Stay tuned. Now, today's particular dish is most commonly referred to today as Johnny cakes, but back then it could also be referred to as journey cakes or hoe cakes. The name hoe cakes actually has led to this centuries-long misconception wherein people thought that slaves, indentured servants, or just even poor white farm workers were out there in the middle of their fields, or early in the mornings, the wives would be taking the spade of a hoe upon which to cook these corn cakes. And that is honestly not the greatest of ideas, as any metal worker could tell you, that if you constantly heat up metal and then let it cool down without quenching it or tempering it, something like that, well, the metal will very quickly become brittle and break. Certainly something you don't want to have happen to a gardening tool. Also, this brings up the point of, if you're out there working in the field and you try and stop for a break and make some hoe cakes on the spade, if that was a thing, then you stand a very good chance of actually losing your crop from a potentially uncontrolled fire. So, needless to say, that is not why they're actually known as hoe cakes. Originally, there was a griddle specifically made for cooking flat bread, such as Johnny cakes or hoe cakes, which was actually shaped like the spade of a hoe. So that is actually where we get that name from, and finally we can put that myth to rest. But what's interesting to note is that although Washington's slaves might have been eating those Johnny cakes at different points throughout the day, we also see that Washington loved them. And numerous visitors who came to Mount Vernon, they recounted very frequently with how George Washington loved Johnny cakes so much so that he would eat them for breakfast, sometimes even lunch and dinner. And now, the Johnny cakes that he would have been served at Mount Vernon would have definitely been a lot more on the rich side. They would have had some of the finer cornmeals, some better ingredients, a touch more seasoning than some of the foods we've had here in the past. And one thing that he absolutely loved was molasses. But then, of course, comes the American Revolution, and with it comes a lack of provisions. Now, Washington was able to get a hold of some of the provisions to enjoy some of his favorite foods while on campaign. In fact, we see that John Hancock actually had his wife make up a barrel of salted fish and sent it to Washington as a gift while they were at a winter encampment. Washington later would go on to write his thanks, his gratitude towards John Hancock and his wife for the barrel of salted fish. He said, "My compliments to your wife for the salted fish. It is something that I am very fond of, yet I do not think often of it until it is placed before me." Well, we're not cooking up any kind of salted fish, but we are going to cook up the Johnny cakes, and we are going to be cooking it up with kind of the basic, bare essentials ingredients that would have been available to the average soldier. So these Johnny cakes that we are making today would have definitely been more akin to what Washington and Joseph Martin or any soldier in the army during the time of the American Revolution would have been familiar with throughout this time. So stay tuned as we take a look at the ingredients, and then we'll get started cooking them up. Alright, so we've kind of got a pretty good look with the spices inside the cornmeal. You always kind of want to make sure that if you're seasoning anything kind of like for breading or battering, such as Johnny cakes or even batter to get ready to fry something in, if you're putting spices in there, make sure you actually can see the spices in the meal or the flour. Otherwise, you simply don't have enough. And I think a lot of people, they kind of fail to realize that. They get a little too scared and concerned about possibly, doing too much seasoning. But, again, as I've always said, it is a lot easier to add, but it is very difficult to take away when it comes down to cooking. So we're just gently going to start filling out how much water we're going to need for our Johnny cakes here. It doesn't take too much, but we want to get a good consistency. Going to need to add a little bit more water. And something that'll help too while you are doing this is that if you keep your water resting close to the actual to the fire, not on top of it, but pretty close, then you'll actually notice how the warm water helps to mix everything up together a little bit more evenly. So we're getting a pretty good consistency right now, but we still have a little bit more cornmeal left that we have to work with. So we're just going to add in a touch more of the warm water. And we just want to do this in intervals. Otherwise, we could possibly have to go back and use more cornmeal, which for a soldier, I don't think they want to use their rations up any more than they have to, so they're going to take as much caution and care as I would, honestly. So we are getting pretty good on the overall texture of the batter. Now, with this, you almost kind of want to get it to a pancake consistency, or maybe just a hair thicker. And there we go. Mix up a touch more. Alright, and once we get to these to the desired consistency, I will go ahead and bring you guys back so I can show you that we are getting the fire up and running, the skillet is nice and hot, and we're going to introduce our Johnny cakes. But I just wanted to show you this to kind of show you and tell you a few of the tips and tricks that I've learned along the way, whether it be from gourmand type cooking or also just cooking out in the backwoods. So that being said, stay tuned and we're going to get back to cooking here in just a moment. Alright everyone, so we now have the batter mixed together to the right consistency. Just checking on the skillet there real quick, you'll see the consistency is kind of just a touch thicker than a pancake, which is kind of what we're going for. And we've got our spices in there, again, salt, black pepper, and cayenne pepper. Now the skillet is nice and hot, and so we are going to go ahead and take a little bit of our lard. We'll take a little bit of our lard here. We're going to grease the pan down. Let's say we're going to use maybe about, probably just a touch more than a tablespoon, but that's alright. A little lard is good for you. For those of you who don't think it is, I just say, well, you're missing out. Lard is mighty fine, mighty fine. Practically, that's one of the main things I cook with anymore. Is lard, bacon grease, a little peanut oil, and of course butter, because why not? Alright, so we've got our lard in there. We're going to wrap that up. And of course, if your lard starts to evaporate or get absorbed while you're cooking, then don't worry, because we've got more. We'll try and get everything nice and hot. And now we're just going to go ahead and start in with our first Johnny cake. Alright, so our first one is now inside the skillet. And we're just going to let that cook for a little bit. And it's going to kind of be similar to pancakes or if you've ever made cornbread fritters. Once you start to see the bottom side, kind of bubble up and get kind of brown, not burnt, but just a little brown around the edges, then you know that it's about ready to flip over. You know you'll have to flip it over and cook the other side. But that means that once you start seeing that around the edge, then it will be cooked almost halfway through. So we're going to go ahead and cook this one. Again, these Johnny cakes, they're a little bit on the bigger side than the fire cakes we did, but that's okay, because today we have a victory. Today we have Johnny cakes, as opposed to the more meager rations that we've done over the course of the series, fire cakes or the stew. And certainly this, I have no doubt, is going to be way better than the rice and vinegar episode. That was just, with that episode there, folks, I'm just going to tell you right now, I've eaten plenty of questionable things in my life. I've eaten everything from possum to rattlesnake to raccoon, and those, I enjoyed each and every one of them. That one there with the rice and vinegar, that was awful. Just awful. So either way, we're going to go ahead and let these Johnny cakes cook, and once it comes time, we're going to try and flip it over and get a good crust on the other side as well, and then we'll cook up one more, and then we will have our Johnny cakes ready for the taste test and for the final thoughts. Alright everyone, so we are now done with our Johnny cakes. We are ready to do the taste test, and I didn't dole out the batter as evenly as I thought, but that's okay because we have this one cute little Johnny cake here. And guess what? That Johnny cake there is reserved for a cute little girl that I call my wife. So if this big old Johnny cake down here turns out as good as I think it will, then I'm sure she'll like this one here. But with that being said, we're going to go ahead and break off a piece of the Johnny cake, and let's give it a try. Oh, best dish of the series. Okay, I just have to tell you, this one here, I had confidence in it because it reminded me very similarly of cornbread fritters I've made throughout the years. I never added cayenne pepper or black pepper, but it works so well with the salt. The seasoning is just wonderful. And the cayenne pepper, for those of you who are worried about it, don't be, because it adds just enough of a kick to where you feel it kind of tingle your tongue. That's really about all it is. And these are great. Oh my goodness. Honestly, what's left of it, I'm probably going to go ahead, finish it off, maybe throw in a little bit of jerk meat, and that's going to be lunch today. So these are wonderful. And another thing too that I think adds to the overall success, now of course not every soldier had access to this, I did today, and that was lard. The lard, it's not as flavorful as bacon grease, but it still goes a long way. Bacon grease is one of those that when you put it into a food, it almost dissipates immediately. The flavor does, as soon as you take a bite, which leaves you wanting another. Lard is one of those where the pork flavor lasts throughout the entirety of eating whatever dish it's involved in. And so I will say to those of you who out there don't eat lard, don't eat bacon grease or butter or what have you, you're missing out. You truly are. You can throw all your health concerns at me all you want to. A lot of it's, been disproven, but I'm not going to get into all that. But nonetheless, I will say, these right here are excellent. It would be a worthy addition to any encampment or reenactment you go to. And, it just kind of strikes me, I've been making cornbread fritters for years. And salt, yeah, I'd put a little bit of that in there if I had it, but black pepper and cayenne pepper never crossed my mind. Yet it works so well. It is absolutely delicious. I could see why this would easily be a favorite dish of the men during the time of the American Revolution. So again, these are not meant to be, something that is, a banquet or anything like that. At least to our minds today. But for the men back then who had the means available to make these, this would have been a feast, a victory in their minds, because that meant that they had not only food, not only something to fill their bellies, but something that tasted good. And these right here, my friends, are absolutely worth it in every way, shape, or form. So, yes, they're not like George Washington's Johnny Cakes that they would have served at Mount Vernon, but I'm telling you, they don't have to be. I don't want molasses on these or anything like that. I like them as they are. I think they stand alone. And if I was a soldier in Washington's army and I found out that I had the means to make these Johnny Cakes, I wouldn't complain. In fact, I'm probably going to use this recipe a lot more frequently now, just to go ahead and add them to, standard dinners throughout the day. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our video for the day, but it also concludes the last episode in our series for America's 250th birthday, The Foods That Made America. And as always, we want to thank you so much for following along on Facebook and YouTube. Your support is greatly appreciated. And I will say one of the things I definitely want to leave you guys with is, we've been making these videos in the comfort of the tavern, or at least on the backside of the property. And we don't have an idea of what these men went through. We can only read and look through journals, but there's a lot of stuff I'm sure they omitted. But folks, I don't know about y'all, but again, for me, tasting is one of the best ways to actually experience the history and experience what these men had to go through. It has opened my eyes to so much more, to where I realize just what lengths these men had to go through in order to try and get something to eat, just so they could survive another day, just so they could fight another battle. And it was these small glimmers of hope that they received along the way that enabled them to continue fighting, not for themselves, not for survival, but to fight for America's independence. And if that don't make you respect what these men had to go through, I tell you, I don't know what will. But with that being said, this concludes today's episode, and I thoroughly hope you've enjoyed that and the series as a whole. And until the next time we talk again, this is Isaac White from the Crockett Tavern Museum, signing off for now, saying goodbye and God bless.